Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor, though a rather peculiar one, to be the first, at least within the context of Latvian academia, to speak about philosophy and psychedelics in the same breath. This moment carries a certain historical weight. For the first time at the University of Latvia, these two words, one of them still carrying a slight air of taboo, are being formally brought together. Yet historical moments can sometimes be fleeting. They may pass by unnoticed or leave little lasting impact. Whether this particular moment will bear fruit remains to be seen. Well, at the same time, the peculiarity of our subject invites some light-hearted observations. In the lead-up to this event, some informally referred to it as the Conference on Mushrooms. This in itself is an interesting reflection. These simple yet remarkable beings of nature, mushrooms, can lead us into the depth of philosophical inquiry. Some might find this surprising, but if we take a step back, we should remember how many profound philosophical conundrums and existential knots have been untangled with the help of other beautiful gifts of nature, grapes and wheat. Well, first, let's start with the historical context. Well, why do we start with Aldous Huxley? Well, first of all, he's the figure who brought psychedelics to Western intellectual life. His 1945 book, The Dose of Perception, turned a mescaline trip into a philosophical event, opening with William Blake's line, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." Well, the name Doors, of course, gave also the name for the band Doors. But Blake's point is that our everyday perception is clouded. Huxley thought psychedelics could clear it, revealing reality's boundless depth. Philosophy, though, has often been wary, dismissing altered states as distortions of or mystical quirks. Well, Huxley also helped to name these experiences. In 1956, he traded letters with psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond, who had been exploring consciousness-altering drugs. Huxley pitched phanerothym, from Greek roots meaning soul manifesting, with a playful rhyme. To make this trivial world sublime, take a half of gram of phanerothym. Osmond countered with psychedelic blending psyche, mind or soul, and delune, to make visible. And his own words, to fathom hell or go angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. Well, you should be reminded that Osmond's mind-manifesting term won out, shaping how we talk about these substances today. Although, as you will see, his original term, suggestion was to plumb the depths and soar angelic. Well, this debate echoes a philosophical tension. Huxley's phanerothym nods to revealing the soul, while Osmond's psychedelic suggests uncovering the mind. It's a distinction that recalls American pragmatist philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, who coined the term phaneroscopy. That was his take on phenomenology, from the same Greek root, phaneron, meaning what appears. Peirce wanted to study experience as it shows itself without metaphysical baggage. Like Huxley, he was after what's manifest. Like Osmond, he aimed to make the mind's workings visible. Their terms frame psychedelics as a window onto the soul, the mind, or raw phenomena. Well, this naming story marks a shift. Psychedelics moved from shamanic fringes to intellectual circles. But what are they showing us? That's where philosophy steps in. Does it demystify these experiences, peeling away the spiritual fluff, so to say? Or does it legitimize them, giving tools like psychedelics and ideas like Peirce's a place in serious thought? This brings us to psychedelics as a philosophical subject. Well, this etymology alone invites philosophical reflection. If the term psychedelic literally means revealing or manifesting the soul, then the use of psychedelics is, in a sense, a practice of uncovering aspects of consciousness that remain hidden in ordinary perception. But what does it mean for something to be manifested? Is it created, revealed, or merely made accessible? American philosopher Arthur Danto, in his work Connections to the World, or the Basic Concepts of Philosophy, describes philosophy as a grinding machine, a tool that wears away the mystical and mythological to reveal a clearer intellectual structure underneath. Well, if this is true, what does philosophy do to the psychedelic experience? Does it demystify it, stripping it of spiritual and metaphysical significance, or does it intellectually legitimize it, incorporating it into a broader philosophical framework? This dual possibility, demystification versus legitimization, well, anchors our exploration, at least philosophical one. Well, if we accept that psychedelics alter perception in fundamental ways, we can ask whether they also serve as tools for philosophical inquiry. Indeed, they allow us to explore core philosophical oppositions, process versus stability. Do psychedelics reveal a reality that is inherently dynamic and fluid rather than fixed and stable? Also, realism versus anti-realism. Do they expose aspects of reality that exist independently of human consciousness? Or do they demonstrate that reality is always shaped by perception? From epistemological perspective, even distortions and hallucinations must be taken seriously. After all, if we define reality as all that is, then dreams, hallucinations, and psychedelic experiences are not unreal, but part of a broader spectrum of human experience. This leads us to a crucial question. What does expanding consciousness actually mean? Is it simply an increase in awareness, or does it entail the reconfiguration of consciousness itself? If so, what are the philosophical implications of such a transformation? Psychedelics challenge fundamental philosophical assumptions about self, reality, and perception. If the mind is not a fixed entity, but something that can be radically transformed by substances, what does that imply about personal identity? If perception is not a passive reflection of reality, but an active, malleable process, then can we still speak of an objective world at all? Rather than viewing psychedelics as external distortions of perception, we might instead treat them as philosophical instruments, tools that force us to rethink the very categories upon which philosophy is built. This applies not only to experimental philosophy, but also to metaphysical inquiry in a deeper sense. The psychedelic experience and the reflection that follows it naturally brings forth the most central questions of metaphysics. Realism versus anti-realism, the nature of the mind-independent world, and the possibility that aspects of reality are in some way mind-constituted. Let's move on to psychedelics as philosophical instruments, epistemological, metaphysical, and methodological dimensions. Well, psychedelics have long been dismissed as mere tools for escapism, but contemporary research and philosophical inquiry suggests they possess profound implications for epistemology, or theory of knowledge, metaphysics, or theory of what exists, and the philosophy of mind. Rather than treating them as distortions of reality, they may be better understood as instruments for its deeper investigation. Methodological tools that, like telescopes and microscopes, scientists, hardcore scientists, excuse me for this comparison, extend the range of what can be seen, known, and questioned. This perspective frames psychedelics not only as subjects of philosophical analysis, but also as tools for doing philosophy, in a sense even experimental philosophy. Well, particularly in relation to the nature of perception, knowledge, and reality. A key philosophical question about psychedelics is whether they reveal truth about consciousness and the world, or merely produce chemically induced hallucinations. In philosophy of mind and cognitive science, perception is understood as shaped by neural and cognitive processes. If everyday experience is already filtered through these mechanisms, why should it be considered more valid than the altered states psychedelics induce? Some argue that psychedelic experiences can yield genuine insights, even within a naturalistic view where cosmic consciousness quote and unquote, might be an illusion. The debate hinges on whether these states provide knowledge or simply offer comforting delusions. Well, this aligns with another American pragmatist philosopher, father of modern psychology, William James's radical empiricism, which holds that all experiences, including psychedelic ones, are real insofar as they influence cognition and perception. So he wrote, our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus and a touch, they are there in all their completeness. Definite types of mentality which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. Well, from this view, psychedelics don't necessarily distort reality. They suggest reality may be more malleable than we assume. In philosophy of science, psychedelics challenge scientific realism, which grapples with how perception shapes knowledge. If these substances produce coherent, transformative states, dismissing them as hallucinations or just merely hallucinations might oversimplify the issue. They could act as alternative lenses revealing aspects of reality hidden in ordinary consciousness. This question also carries socio-political weight. Labeling experiences as real or illusory isn't just a personal matter. It reflects broader cultural biases. Just as psychedelic states are often marginalized, so too are certain political or ideological perspectives. If perception is shaped by neurological and social factors, who decides what counts as real and on what basis? Psychedelics also raise metaphysical questions about reality, selfhood, and the mind's relationship with the world. So-called ego dissolution, or a common effect where the self's boundaries fade into a sense of cosmic unity, forces us to ask, is the self an illusion or just a fluid process? Does consciousness extend beyond the individual? Do these experiences point to a dynamic, relational view of reality? Some suggest psychedelics align with process philosophy, which sees consciousness as emergent and ever-changing and never fixed. They might reveal dimensions of experience filtered out by everyday cognition, acting like tools that expand perception. This challenges traditional realism, of course. If psychedelic states feel more real than real, do they undermine standard hierarchies of reality? Since all perception is mediated to a certain extent, can any state claim ultimate truth? These questions blur the line between reality and illusion, pushing us to rethink rigid metaphysical categories. Well, psychedelics aren't just subjects to study. They're tools for exploring reality, much like mathematics and physics, or thought experiments in philosophy. They expand perception and cognition, uncover layers of consciousness inaccessible otherwise. In philosophy of mind, they illuminate debates about altered states, selfhood, and the nature of consciousness. If they show the mind can construct radically different yet coherent realities, they question assumptions about the stability of self and world. These states might not be aberrations, but part of a wider range of cognitive possibilities, offering clues to the mind's structure and its interaction with reality. Psychedelics invite reflection within a broader landscape of altered states and philosophical traditions. Dreams, meditation, and mystical states are also non-ordinary experiences. What makes psychedelics unique? They could bridge modern research with historical practices like shamanism or Asian self-cultivation traditions, raising questions about whether they mimic or distort states achieved through disciplined effort. If they provide quick access to mystical experiences, do they bypass the transformative work those traditions demand? Well, there's always certain skepticism involved. And skepticism about their epistemological value persists. Do they uncover deeper truth or just create compelling illusions I just mentioned previously? Well, comparing them to psychosis or other hallucinations might clarify their status. A cautious approach keeps these questions open, enriching the debate without rushing to conclusions. Although all metaphysical and epistemological doubts are perfectly acceptable, well, we must not forget that the tradition of European philosophy also contains voices that urge us to think of philosophy as a conceptually liberating tool. Well, let's remember Wittgenstein. What is your aim in philosophy? To show the fly the way out of the fly bottle, he says in Philosophical Investigations. Well, long time before him, albeit in a slightly different fashion, Epicurus observed that vain is the word of a philosopher which does not heal any suffering of man. So therefore, therapeutically, psychedelics show promise for treating addiction, PTSD, depression, and, well, to be frank, existential distress that everyone, each of us suffers now and then. This aligns with pragmatic philosophy, which values ideas by their ability to reduce suffering. Yet they aren't a cure-all. Lasting change likely requires effort beyond the experience itself. Their limits and risks, like escapism, need scrutiny alongside their benefits. Finally, my conclusion. This proves that I'm definitely not going through the trip because the time dilution doesn't work, so I'm within the time bounds. So. The philosophy of psychedelics isn't fringe anymore. It strikes at the heart of Western thought. In theory of knowledge or epistemology, it probes the limits of knowledge. In metaphysics, it questions what's real. In political philosophy, it can be also applied to this field. It challenges who defines altered states, who controls them, and who polices them. But let's return to where we began, Huxley and Osmond. Their naming debate, phanerothym versus psychedelic, soul versus mind, mirrors, in a certain sense, our task today. Does philosophy demystify these experiences, grinding away the mystical haze, as Danto might suggest, leaving us with a clearer, harder truth? Or does it legitimize them, making psychedelic tools for seeing the world anew? Yet, philosophy's role is distinct from both science and literature. Science investigates the mechanisms of psychedelic states, how they alter cognition, their neurochemical substrates, their therapeutical potential. Literature captures their ineffability, transforming subjective experience into narrative, expanding the limits of expression. Philosophy, however, does something else. It clarifies. It examines the very concepts that frame our understanding: self, reality, perception, and knowledge, laying bare their presuppositions, and testing their coherence. Psychedelics, then, do not merely pose empirical or poetic questions. They force us to refine our conceptual landscape. Therefore, they strip away illusions of a fixed self or stable reality, yet elevate these substances from taboo to instruments of inquiry, expanding what we can know and question, or maybe somehow, in an unsettling manner, adds another layer of illusions and conundrums. If philosophy seeks understanding, it can't ignore these strange allies. From mushrooms to mind, psychedelics don't just echo old debates. Well, they demand we rethink them. And that's their challenge and their promise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you are leaving us enough time for questions. Do we have questions in the audience? Yes, please. But yeah.
Microphones?
Well, thank you very much. When you mentioned Aldous Huxley, I immediately thought that maybe some pills in Brave New World are the future of Europe, psychedelic use. Well, but what I wanted to ask to you as a person who, one of the few who understands East in Latvia, is that do you think it could be wise to revisit some work of Timothy Leary and Ramdas that in accordance to Tibetan Book of Death and the psychedelic experience as a way to overcome or decrease, as Ernest Becker would put it, the denial of death in humans as such? Thank you.
Well, before the conference, I paraphrased Timothy Leary as turn on, tune in, but by no means drop out. I think that is one of the cul-de-sacs when it comes to use of psychedelics in that context, as it was during the counterculture at the end of the 60s. What I'm myself more interested in comparing certain of these states, because for a philosopher they are phenomenological states. They are just the way we perceive them. This is very different from the way the natural scientists, as they presented this morning, they approach it. But how do these experiences map onto certain psychotechnical results of Buddhist meditation, just for example? Although this is a conundrum, if we wanted to do a controlled study on Buddhist meditators, they would first of all have to relegate all their moral, so to say, rules that they follow, because among the 200 on some of them, one of them is definitely which prohibits you to use any kind of substances that would cloud your mind. So in that kind of, it would be difficult to imagine how that kind of study would happen. But apart from that, what strikes me when these experiences are detailed, that there is an undeniable similarity, because at this point we can speak only of similarity, that which pertains to certain descriptions of higher and deeper states of Buddhist meditation. That's for sure. But whether there is a strong correlation or strong causation, that's another question.
Okay, do we have more questions? Maybe I can pose one. Actually, you already mentioned yourself that today we experience two very different approaches to this topic. One from people who are coming from medical science, who are studying very exactly, very precisely things and measuring things very precisely, and from perspective of philosophy, when you are speaking about how we perceive world, how we are looking at the world in different situations with psychedelics and without them. What struck me during the first part of the conference, when our guest spoke about mystical experience, then if you notice on graphs there was specific number, very precise number, from 0 to 100, attributed to certain mystical experience. It means that mystical experience can be measured and measured very precisely. What do you think? Is it possible to bring together this very precise scientific or exact science attitude to measure all these things? And you mentioned several times William James, who tried to do that in some sense, and this philosophical approach. And if these two approaches are together, can we expect something new and interesting coming out, or simply they don't overlap?
Oh, I think definitely there's a possibility of bringing them together. Well, mentioning William James, he also had his time with certain types of drugs and was into spiritualism, which was very popular at the end of the 19th century in the United States. But comparing approaches from the exact sciences and philosophy and social science? Well, I think that's just they approach the same objects of study just from a different perspective. That's first of all. The second one, where philosophy helps. Philosophy, but this should be understood that philosophers, especially those who work in close collaboration with exact scientists, they need to understand a little bit of what is going on there. But on the other side, the exact scientists need to understand a proper use of terms, if I may say so. Just to give you a very quick example, we are used to, especially following all the studies made by neuroscientists and cognitive scientists, we are used to say that my brain made me to do this and my brain made me to do that. From the point of view of philosophers, that is a complete categorical mistake. Brain does not make you do anything because you should be perceived as a whole person, which also involves the whole body. So this idea of thinking that, for example, brain makes you to do something is in a very strange way reminiscent of old philosophical problems like Descartes' dualism, who thought that res cogitans, the thinking part, is just completely different substance and should be taken away from extended things or bodies which are just mechanistically moving in the space. So in that sense, it is obvious to most of people involved that a new approach should be used to somehow explain the working of biochemistry in the brain and the way it pairs with the way you perceive it, even if it just seems so, or even that scientists might tell you that it's just a hallucination, because you're never going to escape it. No matter how many times scientists tell us that the sun is at the center of the solar system and the Earth revolves around the sun, we are always bound to the perspective where the sun rotates, and so these are kind of our limits of our perception. But these various approaches just allow us to peel away and look deeper.
Thank you. Definitely, it's topic for next conference.
Oh, exactly. This is. I wanted to say that if we achieve anything, that this might be the next stepping stone, and maybe within the confines University of Latvia, a course on psychedelics and philosophy also would be welcoming.
Okay, let's thank Kaspars again.